Hello, I'm Andy Agathangelo, the founder of the Transparency Task Force. We are a certified social enterprise that is dedicated to helping to reform the way the financial industry works. We do this because we believe our work is very important. We think that the financial sector is profoundly important to the well-being of society, to economic stability and political stability as well. Over the last 6 years, we've grown our community from just me to a community of, in fact, just over 4,000 people now around the world, mostly in the UK, but also across Europe, North America, Australia, Singapore, Hong Kong, South Africa, and one or two other places as well. We run lots of events. I think perhaps one of our most enjoyable event formats are our film club sessions, where, as we know, we get to watch a movie or a documentary in this case and talk about it afterwards. So very pleased that everybody's decided to join us for the next hour or so. We sometimes overrun by a little bit, so it might be past 7 o'clock UK time by the time we finish. But we're going to have a very relaxed and hopefully enjoyable conversation talking about what I think is one of the most important documentaries ever made that relates to our sector. Gareth Steers is going to be covering off some slides shortly. I'll invite Gareth to briefly introduce himself now, and then we'll go to everybody else, and then we'll get stuck into the slides and then the Q&A discussion bit after that. So Gareth, could I please invite you to introduce yourself first of all? Thank you.
Thanks, Andy. Yes, my name's Gareth. My day job is as a pensions technical consultant with a company called Aries Insight. So I got involved with the Transparency Task Force, attending a seminar on pension scams. But I heard about the film club, and before I joined the pensions industry, I was at university studying film. So a long-held interest in film, thought I'd come along, and after a few goes, Andy heard about my film past and thought I'd make a good candidate for the head of the film club. And here I've been ever since.
And Gareth does a great job, as you'll see tonight. Gareth, thank you very much indeed. We'll go to Mr. Nigel Cairns. Nigel, nice to see you as always.
Good evening, everybody. Nigel Cairns. I'm coming from Devon, where I've got a small holiday let business. And in common with many other TTF people, I'm a victim of bank malfeasance.
Thank you very much indeed, Nigel. We now go to Cara Williams. Cara, please take yourself off mute and tell us where you are, what you do.
Hi, everybody. So I'm Cara. I'm a PhD student at Lancaster University. And I was a mortgage prisoner, so that's how I came introduced to the TTF. I took part in the seminar discussion that you had, was it last month, Andy? I can't quite remember, I'm so busy, but yeah, found it really interesting. And then I received an email today about this film club. So I apologise, I've not actually watched the documentary, but it's something that really interests me, and I promised to watch it straight after this discussion, and I'll try and join in without even watching it. I'm interested in corporate kind of exploitation at all levels and economic abuse. And I used to work, prior to going to university, I worked in the finance sector for independent financial advisors for high net worth clients. So I've got kind of some insight into the functioning at that level as well. So yeah, I'm looking forward to the discussion. Thank you for having me.
Cara, thank you for being here. And I honestly think that when you watch the documentary, you will be able to relate directly to some of the themes within it, the kind of antisocial corporate conduct of organisations such as Cerberus and others. The vulture funds in the States really does align perfectly with the kind of abusive exploitation that the documentary uncovers. Cara, great that you're here. Thank you. Mr. Tom Livett, you're next.
Thank you. Well, I've only partially watched the documentary. I sort of felt it was rather losing its way after an hour and a half. But I think the first hour and a half was certainly sufficient to get the flavour. And I did think it was of its time, let's say. I'm a freelance consultant and writer on responsible and sustainable business. I think that business not only can be, but has to be a force for good. And I'm delighted with the way that message is actually spreading throughout the business world, even if the world of finance seems to be a little deaf towards it. And I think probably the biggest need for progress is in the world of finance in that respect. So that's me. I'm the author of a book called The Company Citizen.
Thank you very much indeed, Tom. Wonderful. Mr. Robert Lynham, please introduce yourself. Thank you, Robert.
Hello, I've just finished my undergraduate degree in international relations, and next week I'll be starting a virtual internship with the TTF. Excited to help them out with some research, possibly based on the social impact of financial infringements. So yeah, that's me.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Robert. We're looking forward to having you with us on the team. We'll now go to Vilde. Vilde, if you can, please make yourself visible, but if you can't, don't worry, just carry on as you are. But please do take a moment to briefly introduce yourself. Vilde, thank you.
Hi, my name is Vilde and I'm from Norway. And I'm a first-year student studying business in London. And I'm very happy to be an intern here at the TTF for the summer.
Thank you very much indeed. Vilde is going to be starting with us very, very shortly. And Vilde was kindly introduced to us by Kim Schweitzer, who will be introducing herself shortly. We go from Vilde to Veronica. Hello, Veronica. Very nice to meet you tonight. Please take a moment to introduce yourself. Thank you.
Okay, Veronica Mervis. I'm actually a white African. I lived in Rhodesia for many years, and you spent 15 years trying to kill me, but as you can see, you didn't succeed. Right. Then we became independent. No, it was the British government and Americans tried to kill the whites in Rhodesia because they wanted to take over the country. It then became Zimbabwe under Robert Mugabe, and I lived there for 19 years. I was company secretary of a large organization. I then changed and ran my own business to help education of Black people, for which I was the racist over here. I then, what else did I do? I've got an honours degree in psychology. I trained as a nurse at the Middlesex Hospital in London. So I've got a pretty varied background, which includes breaking in horses. The reason I'm here is, okay, I've got a heck of a lot of wide experience in cross-cultural psychology. And my beef is you've got to get this out to the people. And it's something that I do. I spend a lot of time on Facebook and Twitter, just giving sound bites to people. And it's amazing how people are getting more and more educated. And, you know, without even knowing each other, we've actually changed quite a few things. I mean, if you could have seen the storm against Matt Hancock, and it isn't stopping, we're pushing an awful lot of energy. But what I've felt for a long time is I've known about the RBS scandals, but nobody was letting the public know. And I think we need the force of numbers behind us to really frighten the government and get them to change. We won't get changes in finance as long as they feel safe. And that's would be my contribution. I'm a bit past my sell-by date now, but I can certainly do Twitter and Facebook and we'll start causing problems over there.
Thank you, Veronica. Thank you very much. What an interesting introduction. We enjoyed that. Let's go to Kim Schweitzer. Thank you, Kim.
Yeah, I'm so sorry. I have a lot of noise behind me at the moment. And so I might have to jump back onto mute soon. Shall I do a really quick introduction? Kim Schweitzer, founder of Time for Change London, and I'm an ambassador and a volunteer with the Transparency Task Force. And I'm very impressed, Veronica, about how you can do Twitter and Facebook, because I use my LinkedIn really well, but Twitter and Facebook, you will have to help me out and learn some more about that. But glad to be here, and you know, welcome to everybody who's first time.
Thank you, Kim. And again, thank you very much indeed for introducing us to Vilde. That's lovely. Let's go all the way to Canada now to Mr. Ed Tuhig, who's becoming a real regular at TTF events, which is lovely to see. Ed, please introduce yourself. Thank you.
Ed Tuhig, I'm in Nova Scotia, Canada. and I have a major interest in government policy and macroeconomics now. And I look at that documentary on corporations, and it makes me so angry at governments because I cannot really see anything to hold these corporations back unless it is the government with proper regulations of corporations and the financial sector. And so the documentary itself was not a bad documentary, a little bit complicated, I thought, at times, but I certainly enjoyed watching it, and except that it made me so angry at government for its absolute failure to put in proper policies to control the economy and particularly to control the corporations and the financial sector. Thanks.
Very, very well put, sir. Feeling angry is one of the emotions I felt as we were going through it as well. Jordan Barnett is one of our TTF colleagues. Jordan's been with the TTF now for, it must be almost coming up to a week, I think. And Jordan is responsible for our video editing, hence he's working in the background as we're all chatting away. And talking about chatting away, it's now time for Gareth Steers to start chatting away. So Gareth, over to you, sir, to run through your slides. Perhaps we can go through those all, and then we'll open up the discussion after that, and I'll take care of the kind of the Q&A bit after that, Gareth. So over to you, sir. Thank you.
Yes, this is a neat little photo I found to express the idea of the corporation. No offense to AT&T, it's just a good photo. But I thought I'd start just by, especially for those who haven't seen the film, a quick explanation. So, yeah, directed by Mark Akbar, Jennifer Abbott, but most importantly, written by Joel Bakan. We'll come on to him again later, but he was involved in the writing of this documentary, and it was based on his own book, The Corporation, The Pathological Pursuit of Profit and Power. Quite an old film, 2003 it was released. I saw it not long after it was released. I read a positive review. And one thing which I did say in my mailing on this is that I'd forgotten a little bit about the film, but watching it again, I realized it's really, a lot of it has stayed with me, and it's really had a profound effect on me and my view on corporations over the years. Just a quick synopsis. In fact, you've probably had a chance to read the synopsis here. I don't like people reading off slides word for word, so I'll leave this on for about 10 seconds because I think the next slide actually explains this point very well. The first about third of the film is dedicated to this idea that corporations in America, at least, have earned the legal right to be treated in law like a person, like a human being. They have the same rights. So yeah, so if a corporation can be treated as a human being, what kind of human being are we dealing with here? And so they compare corporations to this psychopath checklist or personality checklist, and the conclusion they come to is that the sort of person a corporation is a psychopath or a sociopath. So you'll see all these ticks on the left correspond with a short section of the film. So one feature that's common in a psychopath is a callous unconcern for the feeling of others. And to demonstrate this idea, the documentary looks at sweatshops in the third world and the treatment of people in those sweatshops, the low pay, the terrible conditions. Then moves on to incapacity to maintain enduring relationships. This is kind of a comic aside, really, but it does point out that a corporation, as soon as a country, you start to see upward pressure on wages and workers start to perhaps organize, then they'll simply up sticks and move to another country, which is desperate for outside investment, and then pay sweatshop wages there. So I won't go entirely through the list, but you'll recognize these if you've seen the film. There's a lot of examples of really terrible corporate practice, and the sort of things, if a human being had done them, you would think that this is an evil person, but corporations seem to get off more lightly. Also, at the beginning of the film, this phrase, "a few bad apples," is repeated several times. It's often the excuse given whenever you see an example of corporate bad behavior. You might see their apologists saying, "Oh, well, this is a few bad apples. Corporations themselves aren't to blame. It's just a couple of isolated incidents." But what a documentary tries to demonstrate is this is so widespread, you really can't say it's a few bad apples, and is actually perhaps just a feature of the corporate structure itself. Now, I put a few questions in there. I might return to this slide then to put these questions to the group as a kickoff point. So I've just got 2 more slides. I really didn't want to sort of hog the whole event myself. One thought I had about the documentary was this recurring theme of externalization. I think it was Milton Friedman, hardly a communist, who called corporations an externalizing machine. And so you see examples of this with environmental destruction. What I think one talking head in the documentary put quite nicely as the death of birth. The treatment of the environment and the threat we see to the future of the planet, quite a lot of it from corporate activity. This idea of plunder as well, that materials that are not exhaustive, that are not renewable, are just being used up with no thought for the next generation. And in a slightly different tack, something I thought was quite an interesting part of the documentary was this idea of the nag factor. To explain this is the idea that toy companies, for example, or any corporation whose principal client or target audience is children, are very aware that the best way to increase their sales is to encourage children to nag their parents. And so they're very comfortable with the idea of manipulating children with their brains, which are unformed, into nagging their parents. And this idea that we'd all be very squeamish if a person came into our home and started trying to indoctrinate our children to their own ends. But again, corporations seem to be able to do this without attracting the same sort of criticism. So this is a concept we can come back to if anyone has anything on this. My final slide was on perception management. Is another theme that I thought emerged. So the best example of this was closer to the end of the film, where you had these 2 reporters, Jane Aker and Steve Wilson, and they'd come up with a story about, it was a Monsanto drug, I think. And it was a good story. It was all ready to go. Fox were just about on board and ready to air it. Perfectly good documentary. But of course, then they started to get pressure to change it and dilute the story. And it really highlighted the obvious conflict of interest news channels have when they rely on advertising. So if they're criticizing corporations, they're not likely to receive much revenue for advertising from these same corporations. So I think that conflict of interest is very interesting. And it's the same as well when news organizations are owned. One of the biggest, where the obvious example is Rupert Murdoch, but then there's also Jeff Bezos as well, owns a couple of news organizations. But on the flip side of this, another thing which stayed with me from this documentary all these years was this idea that Michael Moore put at the end, as sort of the positive end to the documentary, was this idea that the greedy man will sell you the rope to hang them with. And actually, the thing with corporations is because they are only interested in greed, if you can find a way to make money whilst also bringing attention to and encouraging good practice, then they'll go with it. They're not in it to do evil. They're in it to make money. And if you can align the two, then the corporation perhaps can be a force for good, as long as there's money in it for them. So perhaps not the incentives not in the right place, but it's just an interesting angle that the film's left with. So that's all I wanted to say. I didn't want to completely monopolize the whole film club this evening, but as a kickoff point, I will go back to this slide as I put a few questions in there. Is it a case, do we think, of a few bad apples? Is it possible for there to be corporations which really are a force for good, despite this idea that they have to put profit above all other considerations? Or by their design, are corporations just inevitably always going to be bad and a pernicious entity in our society? So I'll open to the floor.
Gareth, thank you for doing such a good job as you always do in setting the scenes and preparing some thoughts for us to kind of mull over and chew over there. That's perfect, Gareth. Absolutely perfect. Who'd like to jump in first? So, does anybody have any views on this question? Are corporations kind of hardwired to not to do good, or is there hope somewhere? Who'd like to jump in with that first of all? I'll kick things off if necessary. Tom, go for it. Please do. All take yourself off mute if you want to speak. So Tom, go for it. Thank you.
Yeah, as I said right at the beginning, I think this was a film of its time. It was also a film about America, and the business that Gareth just repeated about profit being the legal duty, the maximization of profit being the legal duty of companies, is true in US law, but not in UK law. It never has been true in UK law. Mm-hmm. And even back then, when this film was being made, the B Corp movement was starting. So, and the B Corp movement managed to change the law in America to allow a purpose other than profit to be put into a company's DNA, as it were. So that's the first point. The second point is that this business of externalization, I thought, was a really good point, really very, very well made. The idea of passing costs on to others, the innocent people, the consumer, the person who lives in the environment itself, and not being accountable for them. But where does the example for that come from? It comes from GDP, which has been around since the 1930s, and it ignores externalities, and it is the official measure of growth of so many countries around the world. So it's not just companies. They're being told externalities don't matter through the use of GDP. Another thing about the timing of the film was one of the big baddies that it showed in there was Nike, and there was the interview with the Nike founder and so on. Well, I think that bit must have been filmed before 2002, because in 2002, Oxfam and the BBC got together and did a real hatchet job on Nike, and they exposed cruelty and poverty and everything else in their supply chain. And what happened? Nike got a conscience and they turned around. And to this day, they probably have one of the most transparent supply chains of any company of their size in the world. Monsanto's been mentioned. The idea of the Terminator gene was, it was up there in the headlines. I remember it 20 years ago. Here's news for you. The Terminator gene was never made, and it was banned by international agreements. So, there's another scare story in the film which never actually happened, which is why I say it's a thing of its time. So I'll leave it there for now, and maybe come in again a bit later.
Thank you, Tom. That's a great input to get us kicking off straight away. Let's go straight to Veronica. Veronica, you've got your hand up. Please take yourself off mute and share with us what you're thinking.
Okay, I'm going to take a psychological look at this. I was interested when Gareth was talking about the psychopathic traits. And what you've actually got going at the moment, you've got a culture, a sort of circle of culture at the top, where it's reinforcing each other that it's okay to be a psychopath, to not care about people and all the traits that he pointed out to us. And in order, it's not the corporation that's at fault, it's the people within the corporation. Absolutely. Okay, so in order to change that, you know, as Thomas said, people have already had a go and broken down Nike and other things. And this is exactly what we have to do. We have to expose, 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 because it's not just in this arena. I work in all sorts of arenas. And let me tell you, the energy against all this corruption and what's going on in the world and the threat to the climate is growing and growing and growing. And I think we have to join the rest of the movements. People are not happy with the way the world is being run from the point of view of corporations and the amount of damage they're doing. And the more we expose our arena of what's happening, I mean, I watched that I came to the insolvency lecture last week, and it was so valid, and but it was so terrifying to think that the cancer in our society was now coming to every area of our lives. It's not just one area, it's the NHS, it's the financial sector, it's what the DWP is doing, killing off people, the amount of starving kids, which are less important than spending 1 point so much trillion on new nuclear weapons. So if we can see it not just in our little group, but that we're part of something very much bigger. And then I think from there, we join in any which way we can and just bang our drums, make our noise, and join the movement of people who are just fed up with the way things are going.
Veronica, I found that very interesting indeed. Thank you so much. This is already quite an impassioned session we're having. Let's go to Nova Scotia, all the way to Ed. Go for it, Ed.
I would just like to mention the point of advertising. It's a charge that goes to the consumer for something that the consumer has no use for in most cases. And to me, I'm very interested in taxation. I think advertising and packaging should be very heavily taxed because it provides nothing of benefit to the consumer themselves. And therefore, it should be taxed heavily to discourage it. Actually, advertising is so harmful. What it does to people to get them to overspend, to buy things that they really don't need. And I've seen so many, I was a trustee in bankruptcy, and I've seen so many people that have spent themselves into bankruptcy buying things that they don't need. I believe that as a part of taxation, that advertising and packaging, which is so damaging to the environment, should be very heavily taxed. And somehow or other, the consumer should not have to bear those costs. They should be borne by the shareholders alone, probably, because that's the only people that benefit from the advertising, not the consumer. And so taxation to me is not to be ignored as a useful tool in controlling these excesses of the corporations. Thank you.
Ed, that's really interesting indeed. Thank you. I get your point, as I always do. If we really kind of try to peel back all the layers of this problem, I think we get to somewhere quite interesting, which is we actually have a very unnatural state of affairs. What I mean by that is the film talks about the creation of a corporation as an entity with limited liability. So just stop and think about this for a moment. So what we're doing here is corporations are created with limited liability, which means they can't be held responsible for the harm they cause. And this, to my mind, is a fundamental flaw in our system. In fact, I would go as far as to say that you will inevitably have a high degree of malpractice, malfeasance, misconduct, mis-selling, etc., if you have entities that are allowed to sidestep what all of us would think of as natural law. Natural law being you are responsible for what you do. You know, we as individuals are held to that kind of scrutiny, but it is perfectly possible for a corporation to sidestep this. And this is not just a problem in relation to limited companies. There's loads of evidence suggesting that the financial services sector started behaving particularly badly when organizations that were previously partnerships, where there was full liability on the partners, when partnerships became limited liability partnerships, they started to display the same, let's call it, casual approach to rules and regulations as corporations have. So I would say that the kind of behavior that this film is all about is going to carry on unless or until there is, frankly, a re-engineering of the legal status of a company and what that company is and isn't allowed to get away with, because otherwise we are, we are just going to be subject to the same dynamics, the forces of profit maximization, externalities, and all these other things. I'm just going to briefly share my screen to share one or two things that might be quite interesting to some of you. Tom very kindly made reference to Nike earlier, and I really genuinely didn't have any thoughts at all about Nike until Tom made the point that he made. So what you're looking at now is a screenshot of a database called Violation Tracker. I know many of you are aware of Violation Tracker because we are closely involved with this project, bringing it to the UK. So here's Nike. I'm very, very pleased to hear and to see rather that Tom's absolutely right. The amount of corporate malpractice that Nike is responsible for is absolutely tiny. You know, basically three cases here, 3 records of where Nike has broken the rules. In 2007, a private lawsuit relating to employment discrimination. In 2020, wage and hour violations. 2016, workplace safety or health violation. And I know that these are, significant cases and the large amounts of fines, but in all honesty, given the size of Nike, that is like, wow, that's a tremendously clean corporate record. Compare that with this organization. As Cara knows, Cerberus is one of the private equity funds that has been involved with buying UK mortgage books, which has resulted in the huge mortgage prisoners problem. In fact, if you go to Cerberus's website, that the entire language is all about maximizing profit for the shareholders, for the partners, etc., etc. It's all money, money, money. My point is that is what they are built to do. They are simply built to make money. And if you look in comparison between Nike and Cerberus, look at the difference. 55 records instead of, I think it was 3. Yeah. And there's a great big long list of things here. I've put these in date order for you. So a load of environmental violations in the early 20s, workplace this, labor relations violations, tax violations, it's all there. You've got the complete minestrone of malpractice within the world of work and corporate affairs. Here we go. Kickbacks and bribery in 2020. Does it surprise any of us that this particular corporation does what it does? Not really. I think many of us have seen the behavior of Cerberus in relation to the mortgage prisoners problem, and I'm sure that doesn't surprise Cara. So I'm just making the point here very generally that if it is possible for a company to be designed to do nothing other than make money, then that is what it will go on to do. Let's go back to Gareth for any further. Oh, actually, we're going to go to Cara here, and then we'll go back to Gareth for some further thoughts from him.
Okay, yeah, thanks, Andy, for sharing that on Cerberus. It's shocking behaviour. My thoughts on this are that, like you say, if a company is structured and their business model doesn't rely on a consumer as such, so Cerberus, none of us chose to be with Cerberus. We didn't go out and buy their products. They took over our mortgages. So therefore, they kind of feel enabled, I suppose, to treat well, we're not consumers effectively, so they can behave however nasty they want to be. Whereas someone like Nike, who's selling a product, especially to a younger generation who are very savvy about wrongdoing and fairness and ethical behaviours, I think people like Nike, they would be silly not to behave kind of ethically, because I think the younger generation will kind of, they'll show their anger through not, actively avoiding certain company behaviours that seem to be wrongdoing and harmful to people. There was a few points I was going to make. So in answer to the original question, are all corporations designed to do harm and damage? Then no, not necessarily, as we can see through the example of Nike. And I think it comes down to humble leadership. So essentially, all corporations are led by human beings, and this is all behaviour of human beings. Sorry, ignore the background noise if you can hear it. So yeah, any bad behaviour, is caused by a human being, which is underpinned by values, and it does come down to the leadership of the corporation, their personal values, their behaviours. And so there are alternatives. I think the younger generation hopefully will show us the way. So I remain positive that corporations can do good rather than harm when they want to, and the leaders want to.
Thanks, Cara. Thank you very much indeed, and thank you for meeting as well. I'm just going to share my screen again, then we're going to go to Kim, who just put her hand up, then we're going to go to Gareth. The reason I share my screen with is because of the leadership word that Cara has just mentioned. So this is a website of the International League of Ethical Financial Services Leaders. As you can see here, it's powered by the Transparency Task Force. For those of you that don't know, we have a major international project on the go, trying to bring to the surface a network of good, honest, ethical leaders within financial services. And it's going quite well, humble beginnings. We've already got some very good people who fit the bill perfectly, and it's growing as time goes by. It really is. Kim, you wanted to make a point, then we'll go to Gareth. Kim.
Yep, I was just going to say that I'm going to put into the chat a link for a presentation that I saw, back in December, I think. And it was two professors at London Business School talking about stakeholder capitalism, and both agreed very strongly on the idea of stakeholder capitalism. But one was coming at it from the perspective of the intrinsic nature of people. So, going back to what Cara just said in terms of the behaviors of individuals, of humans, the values and behaviors. And that is Alex Edmonds, who wrote the book, Grow the Pie. The other professor was coming at it from, we don't necessarily believe that all leaders are going to have those intrinsic values that we need to do the right things. And he comes at it as requiring more regulation. And that is Lucian Babchuk. And he wrote a paper on the illusory promise of stakeholder governance. So I'm going to put the link in to the program because I thought it was really interesting. They both made some great points, and they both believe in stakeholder capitalism very strongly, but they come at it very different ways. And it's always good to see, both ways of a discussion.
Thanks, Kim. That'd be very helpful. I'm sure lots of us will like to take a look at that. I think we're going to go to Gareth, then we're going to go to Tom. I can see Tom's waving his hand as well. Gareth, to you first, please. Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks, Andy. So a few more points. First of all, Tom mentioned in passing about B Corps, and I just wanted to sort of second that because I found out about them quite recently in a podcast, and it's a very interesting concept. So if you don't know anything about B Corps, then the first thing you do after this is finished is go and read a bit about them, because it's very interesting and very, very hopeful development. Yeah, so the legal personality concept was initially, from my memory of the documentary, was meant for freed slaves, I think. And a point the documentary made very well was that it didn't actually benefit very many freed slaves, but the corporation sort of lapped up this right and did very, very well from it. And I think it highlights a point quite well, which is that, you know, the thing with laws is that rich corporations, because they have access to expensive lawyers, are better able to make use of the rights that are available than your average Joe, you know, with much less money. So that was a point I wanted to get across in case anyone wanted to add to that. Finally, from me, we talked about this concept of limited liability. And whenever I think of limited liability, I think about the concept, another psychological concept of diffusion of responsibility. Something no doubt Veronica's very aware of, but I'll just forgive the Wikipedia definition readout, but just to explain, it's a psychological phenomenon whereby a person is less likely to take responsibility for action or inaction when other bystanders are or witnesses are present. And I think you also get this in the top echelons of companies as well, where I don't think you're less likely to feel personally responsible for the actions of your company because you're just one small part of the company and it's much bigger. And whereas these actions that these corporations might be taking, you would never do that if it just came back to you. But because it's all part of this big umbrella of the corporation, I think there is this diffusion of responsibility at play. And that's why you see people who probably aren't terrible people. Maybe some people at the top of corporations are sociopathic, but I really don't think that's the whole explanation. I think good people do worse things when they're under the influence of this diffusion. So that's all I wanted to say. So I guess now we go over to Tom.
Yes, thank you, Gareth. Let's go to Tom. Then we'll go to those who haven't yet had a chance to speak. We'll go to Nigel. We'll go to Vilda. We'll go to Robert and Girk as well, and Mike. So we'll try and whip round everybody so everybody gets a chance to say something, and then we'll look to start wrapping up. Tom, over to you.
I've got 4 points, which I'll make very, very quickly in each case. The first was, Cara, I really liked your idea that because Nike have a young audience, they have to be more ethical. Someone should tell Sports Direct that. They're one of the worst employers in the country, selling very similar goods. In fact, maybe even selling Nike goods. What Nike's point is this. If you look at the published figures, you will see they have a corruption problem. They have a trade union rights problem in their supply chain. But the point is, they know that it's there because they go looking for it, they expose it, and they put it right. So they're never going to have a 100% record, but that's because they're continually working on it to put it right. Second point, B Corps were mentioned. There are 3,000 companies which are B Corps in the whole world, and that's after 15 years of the concept being in existence. About 300 of them are in this country. They are effectively companies which put environmental and social issues first, but they are private companies. They are not social enterprises. They're not charities. And they have to qualify as a B Corps, you have to score 80 odd marks out of 200 on a score sheet. I prefer a movement rather than a club, I must admit, and I think that's probably why there are so few. But I visited several of the biggest B Corps in the world, and I've also visited the very first B Corps in the world, which was a bakery in New York. And I'd love to tell you about those on another occasion. Next point, it's not just corporates. About 4 years ago, I went to the business show at Olympia for small businesses in this country, and there were 400 stalls there. And I reckon 398 of those stalls had the message, sell more, profit more, grow more. Sure. And that was the message that was going out to businesses, to SMEs, irrespective of the consequences. And I was really quite disappointed by it. I just want to end up with a very positive point that came out of the film. Nobody has mentioned a long interview in there with a guy called Ray Anderson. Ray Anderson was the CEO of Interface. And Interface, even back then, probably more so back then, was one of the most sustainable companies in the world. It is the world's biggest producer of carpet tiles, you know, the square tiles you put on the floor. but it's all made from recycled stuff. And it was even 20, 30 years ago. And today they've maintained that. There was also a very nice little cameo role for a guy I know called Mark Moody Stewart, who was then chairman of Shell, but he didn't stay with Shell for very long. He went to Anglo-American, and he turned Anglo-American round. I have to say this, before he went as CEO or chairman, I can't remember which, at Anglo-American, at every mine in Africa, they would allow the men who worked there to pitch their tents around the mine head. Mark changed that. He built communities so that the miners could live in families, and the families would therefore be living and working near the mines. And he turned them into communities. And that made the workforce more stable, more dependable, more reliable, and it meant the company could operate more effectively with a happier workforce. And that was so I'm glad that those two men, Ray Anderson and Mark Moody Stewart, were in the documentary. And there are others. We've gone through all this without mentioning Paul Pullman, who has been leading on this for the last 10 years.
Thanks, Tom. Thanks, Tom. Your comment about caring for the kind of the whole community reminds me of the old Bourneville thing. You know, the way the Bourneville company treated their workers as in a very kind of paternalistic way. Thank you, Tom. Let's go around pretty.
Cadbury did not want his workers to live, quote, where a rose cannot grow.
That's lovely.
That was a lovely way of defining it.
Yeah, very good. In fact, there are many Quaker-based organisations around the world that really have lived their values superbly. Thanks, Tom. Let's go quickly to Nigel Cairns. Nigel, I'm sure you've got some thoughts about this, but if you can be as concise as possible for me, thank you. You're on mute though, Nigel.
There we are. Sorry. Yes, I've just seen Mike join the show. He's been watching the BBRS webinar, which I should have been on as well. But I thought this would probably be a lot more instructive. So perhaps it'd indicate whether it's worth me catching up on the webinar later on or not. But coming back to tonight's subject matter, we started off with bad apples. And I think this exemplifies the recurrent theme of corporate responsibility versus personal responsibility. And, you know, the way that personal responsibility is very much governed by how people view their exposure to other people, to their families, to businesses, and generally. And I think that any of the sessions that I've been on with TTF always seem to come back to the same principle of personal responsibility. And I think that this film really focuses on the same thing in the final analysis.
Thanks, Nigel.
Well, just one other little thing which came to mind, which isn't sort of directly related, was it did remind me actually of a sketch that was on a TV program years ago called Porridge. And there's a chappie, Norman Stanley Fletcher, in his cell with Godber. And Godber says to him, this is set in Slade Prison, what we're all in here for then, Fletch? And he replies to him, well, we're all in here for the same thing, aren't we? Well, what's that, Fletch? Getting caught. And it reminded me of the same defense of the bad apples, that corporations will say these are bad apples just because they've been caught. The fact is that they're all bad apples, but they're only exemplified as such because they're caught. So I thought that was a good analogy.
I think that's really, really clever. I really like that. Thank you very much, Nigel. Let's go to Robert, then to Vilda. then to Girk, then to Mike. Robert, you may well not have had a chance to watch the film because you only heard about it this morning. But Robert, whether you have or haven't, would you like to share any thoughts, please?
Yeah, I did watch it this afternoon. I'd just like to build on Nigel's point about personal responsibility and corporate responsibility, and how best, I guess, is to bridge that gap. I think in the film there was a chap called Michael Moore who made the point of some individuals that make up corporations making cars, for example, and about them not having the big picture awareness of where they fitted in the big picture, I guess. So is part of the solution trying to create some collective self-awareness within a corporation, so make it transferring this collective personal responsibility into this, corporate responsibility as the entity, I guess.
Thank you, Robert. I think there's a lot of wisdom in what you've just said. I'm inclined to wonder whether different types of organizations in terms of corporate structures are more likely to behave better. I'm thinking here, for example, of mutuals. Mutually owned organizations are almost bound to, in my opinion, behave better because they are more tuned into looking after the client or the customer, because they're not simply about making loads of money. In fact, there's quite a bit of a storm in Parliament at the moment. That's exaggerating it. Some people in Parliament are concerned because LV, a long-established mutual, is in the process, it would seem, of being bought up by an American vulture fund type organisation, and a lot of people think that's almost definitely going to result in a change in the culture of the organisation. There's that saying, isn't there? Culture eats strategy for breakfast. If a culture of an organisation is hardwired to be very predatory and very short-termist and very money-grabbing, then it would be weird if the people within it were different to the culture. So yeah, a lot of wisdom in what you say, Robert. Thanks for sharing those thoughts. Vilda, you also may not have had the chance to watch the film yet, but whether you have or whether you haven't, would you like to share any comments you'd like to make, please, Vilda? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I actually did see almost the entire video.
Okay.
And my initial thought was that it's very sad to see how focused the corporations are on profit and how they're run to create shareholder value. Yeah. Especially talking about like the part with sweatshops in the third world. I found that very sad to see how they're not creating any value for the local economy. They're just focusing on creating value for themselves. So the people working there, they don't get enough money they barely survive with the money they get. Yeah. But as mentioned earlier, I think like this is something that is changing, and that especially young consumers are going to demand more sustainable behavior from companies.
I think you're spot on. I think you're absolutely spot on. I think about the way my kids think. There is a definite unwillingness to accept the kind of rubbish behaviour that my generation has tolerated. There really is. What wonderful points, Vilda. Thank you very much. Let's go to Girk, then to Mike. Girk.
Hi. Yeah. Sorry for joining late. I tried to catch up on the phone, but it wasn't connecting, and okay. So I had to wait till I got home. Yeah, the film was very interesting. Some very very interesting points. Certainly the one about the 14th Amendment, which was there to free the slaves.
Yeah.
But only 17 people used it for that purpose, but 288 corporations, which is it's astounding, really, isn't it, when you think about that?
Yeah.
But again, it's another example of these laws that are put there to benefit somebody, and then they're abused by people, yet they don't get changed.
Yeah.
Even after years and years of the system being abused, nobody fixes it.
Yeah. On that particular point, if I can just add in a quick comment here, Girk, thank you. This issue came up earlier in the session. The question is, why is it that in democracies we don't have rules changed to make companies behave properly? I honestly think, and forgive me if I sound a bit cynical here, there is something fundamentally wrong in the way our democracy works. Political parties becoming very, very dependent upon donations. I'm not making a political point here at all, I'm really not, but for example, recently there's been quite a bit of a kerfuffle in the Conservative Party about these planning laws, and I heard on the radio over the weekend, I think it was Any Answers on Radio 4, and I didn't know this, the big property development companies have been making huge donations to the Conservative Party with a view to trying to encourage the Conservative Party to create more lax rules and regulations. So I think there's often a relationship between which organizations are giving political parties money, how those political parties behave, and you end up with this vicious circle where the people in power have as much an interest in looking after their backers and supporters than they have in looking after the people that elected them in the first place. That sounded a bit like a rant, and I guess it was a bit. I don't make apologies for it. Let's now go to Mike. Mike, have you seen the film? Any comments on that? And also, did anything interesting happen on the BBRS front tonight?
Yeah, one good point that come up on the BBRS is the BBRS stated that they got no statutory powers, which was quite interesting, but which was beneficial for me because they said the financial ombudsman obviously do have a lot of statutory powers. So I will be addressing that, but I think the BBRS is a great scheme as long as you can get into it. And you know, that is an issue. I mean, you've got to earn £1 million to get into it. At the time you made the complaint.
Yeah. Well,
I would have thought a lot of people would have been making a complaint at the time they were either transferred the recoveries or not earning £1 million turnover. But I'll email you an update.
Thanks, Mark.
And Nigel.
Thank you, Mark.
And we finally found the gentleman I was looking for.
Oh, okay. Who was it?
Tom.
Oh, it's Tom. Of course it was. Yeah, of course it was. Thank you very much, Lee.
I did try. I said congratulations because obviously they won at Wembley. But yes. So let's go back to the film. I mean, the film itself, I did watch it, and what I've taken from it is, although the slave trade has ended, it obviously haven't. The rat race is getting worse, and one comment that my MP made in Westminster is greed is good, and it seems to be in abundance. And I think the one thing that's going to help the UK is your violation tracker.
Thank you, Mike. We did touch on that earlier on. Thank you very much indeed. Yeah. Super stuff. I'll be throwing it open for general sort of Q&A and discussion shortly. So I'm going to share my screen once again. I'm going to go to our event planner because we have 3 events coming up that will relate to the sorts of things we're talking about tonight. So first of all, on July the 6th, we have an event on Zoom, 6 o'clock, July the 6th. What day of the week is that? That's a Tuesday, I think. Yeah, Tuesday, July the 6th, the case for radical corporate governance reform. That's obviously touches quite closely with what we're talking about this evening. That's all going to be about changing corporate governance so corporates behave better. On Wednesday, July the 21st, we have the case for radical reform of the audit profession, which is a linked topic. Many people, including myself, think the audit profession has been doing a very bad job of holding companies to account and providing true governance and scrutiny. And the really exciting thing, well, I think it's exciting anyway, on Monday, July the 12th, we've got a very, very special film club session. Film Club, The New Corporation. So you may or may not know that a new version of the documentary you've been watching is going to be shown. The session starts at 6 p.m. UK time and ends at 9 p.m. UK time, because we're actually going to be showing the whole film during the session. And then, wait for it, Joel McCann, the maker of the film, is going to be giving a talk to us as well. So we are extremely, extremely pleased about this. It's a bit of a TTF first to manage to do that. It's costing us a few £100. We're not going to charge anybody to come along, but please do make a donation of some kind if you can, just to hopefully help us get our money back. If we can do that, great. But I'm not going to be upset if we don't, because the priority is to simply enjoy the knowledge and the wisdom that we can share through this. What I'm going to do now, if I can find the right bit in my spreadsheets, so I'm about to show you all a trailer about this very special TTF Film Club session we've got coming up. I have actually been given special permission to watch the whole thing myself. I have done that, but you guys and girls are going to have to suffice with just a short trailer. So here we go. There's a pity, because I do want to show you. It's such a good. There we go.
The greed economy is killing us.
We are so steeped in this commodification that it's hard to distinguish between being a consumer and being a citizen.
Seeing the documentary The Corporation, it opened my eyes.
Calling corporations psychopaths absolutely had an impact.
Can we take the resources of corporations and get them to focus on the needs of the poorest?
There is no such thing as corporate social responsibility.
They're literally playing casino with life on Earth.
The changes that we fear are coming faster than anybody thought.
It's completely out of control. Corporations have figured out there are really big business opportunities in these public sectors.
Private schools for the poor is a $51 billion a year market.
Take the education system, take the healthcare system.
That's a direct threat to democracy.
Their reach cannot be underestimated. They know everything about us.
If we don't push back, we're going to live in a world in which they are governing us privately through the profit motive.
One of the largest corporate bailouts with as few strings as possible in American history. Shameful.
Global pandemic. What do we do now? Let's do a tax cut.
The pandemic revealed that we need to contain corporate power.
The democracy is trying to breathe. We can't breathe because of the weight of poverty in our neck.
We have not come here to beg world leaders to care. Change is coming, whether you like it or not.
Are you actually going to challenge the power of corporations? This is what the 2020s will be about.
You have to really ask yourself, what was your role in this moment in history?
Wow. So we're really looking forward to that particular session. It is a great trailer. I agree, Joanne. It really is a great trailer. The bit of with the orangutan on that big branch with the big monster machine coming at it is horrific, absolutely horrific. So that's what we're doing in a few weeks' time. Please do come along to that. We've only got 100 places. Demand's going to be massively outstripping supply. Everybody that's been to a previous TTF book club session or film club session, including all of yourselves, will be given sort of first refusal for a ticket if you want it, because I know that if we made it available to everybody, we'd end up with, quite frankly, hundreds and hundreds of people wanting to go, and we can't do that. So that's what that's going to be all about. Before we do anything else, though, let's show our appreciation to Gareth for leading us through this very, very good session tonight. Gareth, once again, sir, thank you very much. You really are an absolutely ace head of film club for the TTF. You do a great job. You always do a great job. Thank you very much. So we'll wrap it up there. Thank you all very much indeed. Thank you in particular again to Gareth. I'm glad that for those of you that have watched the documentary, have watched it. Of course, our film club, like our book club, is a very deliberate strategy of the TTF to expose our members to thoughts and ideas and insights and experiences of authors, filmmakers, and all the rest of it. It's just a great way to creatively consider some things we may not have known about ourselves. And I genuinely find every one of our film club sessions and every one of our book club sessions to be the kind of things that, you know, stretch the mind, so to speak. So I hope you enjoyed the movie. Hope you enjoyed being part of tonight. Thank you all very, very much indeed. Thank you. We'll wrap it up there. Thank you. Cheers. Good night.